Good evening, and welcome to the third Justice Symposium of 2013 at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. Today's topic, though planned many months ago, resonates with the horror of last week's Boston Marathon bombing and its aftermath. Dr. Scott Atran, a presidential scholar at John Jay and an affiliate of our Center on Terrorism, has dedicated his life to advancing knowledge and understanding of terrorism. With us tonight to introduce Dr. Atran is David Myers, Associate Professor of History at Fordham University. His research focuses on the history of judicial torture and religious encounters in Europe in the early modern world. So please join me in welcoming Professor Myers.
Scott Atran is one of the more distinguished scholars in the field of cognitive science and anthropology and the anthropology of religion. He has a long list of publications and an even longer list of distinguished institutions with which he has been, is, and no doubt will continue to be affiliated. The work that he has done over the last decade is topical to an extraordinary degree. He has talked about the role of religion in terrorism, and he has recently published a book in 2010 on the question of talking to the enemy. I want to make the larger point about Professor Atran's talk itself, that it really operates in two very, very distinct parts. The first part is, of course, about the evolutionary nature of religion itself and about sacred values, not only about the development of sacred values, but also about the way in which societies and religions use, employ, deepen those values. The second part of Professor Atran's talk, however, is about these new post-9/11 very small terrorist groups that are relatively inchoate. We can obviously go to the Tsarnaev brothers from last week, but he focuses very much on the Madrid bombers. And as I said, the more introduction you get, the less introduction you actually need. And so I don't think I need to say anything more to this audience than to say, welcome, Scott Atran.
So religion is really the devil and angel of human history. My own take is religion is pretty much a neutral vessel. You can use it for what you want, but what it does do is it binds groups of genetic strangers for the good and for the bad. In fact, it is the best social glue we know about in human history. Yet ever since 9/11, new atheist thinkers claim that religion is chiefly responsible for war and much human misery, which its demise would greatly reduce. But what we're going to talk about today is sacred values. Sacred values that bound communities, religious communities, but also we'll see communities like nations, like our nations. And they drive actions independently of probable risks and rewards or calculated costs and consequences. And they act as moral imperatives that drive non-rational sacrifices in cooperative endeavors in war. So there's ample historical evidence that when conflict is conceived in terms of these sacred values, when it's conceived in terms of opposing religious and moral frameworks, violence between groups may endure in ever-shifting forms and venues for decades, even centuries. The bottom line, I think, on religion's relation to war is that while there's no necessary link between religious belief and violent conflict, during intergroup contact, protagonists can transform otherwise material interests into sacred values as when land becomes holy land. And now I'm going to show you how the science suggests we actually deal with this. So I run a set of multidisciplinary teams around the world, and we worked in conflict zones, and we've been exploring why people decide to refuse political compromise, go to war, attempt revolution, or resort to terrorism. Kierkegaard's paradox of the preposterous is that the more empirically or logically absurd the religious beliefs, the more unattached to material reality, the more materially and emotionally costly the religious displays associated commitment with those beliefs, the greater the willingness of people to sacrifice their self-interest in the defense of others who also display commitment to those beliefs. I mean, think about it. That is, people are willing to make their greatest sacrifices, including their lives, really only in the service of preposterous beliefs, never in the service of instrumental cost-benefit analyses. So what I'm proposing here is that we need a completely different paradigm in terms of not only how we deal with things like ordinary behavior, but in terms of our political and economic institutions, most of which, especially since World War II, have been dominated by the rational actor paradigm. That is, the idea is we have a set of preferences, we order those preferences, we try to accomplish goals in accordance with those preferences in a logically and rationally coherent means-ends relationship. And what I'm arguing is that's really not what human beings are about. Now, more is known about economic decision-making than morally motivated behavior. And much more is known about rational actors than devoted actors. But here are some of the characteristics that I'm going to talk about that we've experimented on. One, sacred values are insensitive to quantity. For example, if I'm a suicide bomber and I believe in what I'm doing, it doesn't matter if I kill 1,000 people, if I kill 100 people, if I kill 10 people, or I just kill myself. God will love me just the same, and so will everyone else. They're immune to material trade-offs. I wouldn't give this up for all the money in China, or all the punishments, all the sanctions possible. They're insensitive to framing effects, that it doesn't matter if it's loss or gain. They have a very privileged link to the emotions. They determine who I am and who we are, and when they are violated, we can become angry, disgusted, and violent. They generate actions independent of prospects of success, and they have distinct neural processing signatures in the brain. So this is how we proceed in our work. We've discovered what we think is the backfire effect. That is, when things are truly sacred, the more money or material goods you offer to give it up, or the more you threaten material sanctions and punishment, the more violent people will become, and the more likely they are not to accept the trade-off, which flies in the face of sort of standard economic and political theory. Just 4 days before the withdrawal from Gaza of the Israeli settlers, we tested the settlers on whether they'd be willing to take monetary compensation for leaving Gaza. Okay? There are two groups of settlers. There are those settlers who go for quality of life. Okay? And there are others who go because they're Zionist ideologues. They believe they're Zionist pioneers like the pioneers of old. For the first group, that is those who go for quality of life, they respond just like rational actors do. That is, the more money you offer, the more they're willing to abandon it. They abandon the settlements and accept the 1967 solution. For those who are ideologically motivated and religiously motivated, the opposite occurs. The more money you propose to them, the angrier they get, and the more likely they're even willing to take up armed resistance against their own people. Now, we reported this. We went to the White House, and we briefed the National Security Council on some of this. And the response was very interesting. Elliot Abrams, who was in charge of the Middle East desk under President Bush, he said, I knew it. I told Sharon that we shouldn't have never offered them money because they were going to get pissed off. We should have told them that they were really Zionist pioneers and they were doing it for the greater good. So what we find is just showing a little bit of respect, of recognition of the other side, can lead to breakthroughs in negotiation. Now we come to terrorism. Let's take just very quickly a look at the Madrid bombing. Now, people claimed it was Al-Qaeda. We had people pore over the trial transcripts and the interrogations for months, thousands upon thousands, and the reaction was, where's Al-Qaeda in all of this? It's because there was no Al-Qaeda in any of it. Al-Qaeda as a central control organization not only was destroyed, but it really never existed. Al-Qaeda was much more like the National Science Foundation or the National Institutes of Health. People applied to Al-Qaeda. Give them projects. People would accept 15 to 20% of these projects for funding. Now, with Al-Qaeda, the Shura Al-Qaeda destroyed, it became a social movement scattered across the world, with young people trying to hook up into the movement. Now, we have something very peculiar, a convergence of two sorts of things happening that allows this to occur over the internet and other places. First, for the first time in human history, we have a massive media-driven political awakening. While it allows hooking up among young people across the world, can also, for the very first time, restrict the amount of information people are paying to a very, very, very narrow bandwidth. So in one sense, it's extremely broad. In one sense, it's extremely narrow. For them, this narrow bandwidth can be the world and is the world. So the vertical lines of communication and learning between elders and youngers, between organized institutions and society across generations, is fragmented and sundered. And young people are flailing about, unmoored from their cultural traditions, looking for meaning in life. And especially for those who are the driftwood of globalization, the disaffected, the marginal. And mostly these people are young men in transitional stages of their lives, immigrants, students, between jobs, between girlfriends, hooking up with one another. And where they go, the path they follow, actually depends on who their friends are. These are the guys who blew up Madrid, right, who were captured. They got a bunch of friends together. Most of the friends were actually former drug guys, not ideologues. What we're finding in the jihad is that the criminals are the ones who want to blow themselves up. Why? Because they don't want to be criminals. They want to be heroes. And now you're offering them the chance to be heroes. While the students, they do a lot of talking, but they don't do much of all. It was such a harebrained operation. It involved 30 people. Nobody knew what they were doing. Just like the Bali bombers, who figured out that when they finally got the suicide bomb packs together, no one knew how to drive a car, so they had to ask somebody to give them driving lessons so they could go to the place they wanted to blow up. These same guys, just as they're about to get into the car, they realize they don't have the right backpacks, but they have no more money for backpacks, so they have to do another drug operation to get the backpacks. Again, these are not command and control organizations. It costs very little money. It was financed entirely on drugs, cost about $40,000 to $50,000. The reaction to it, you can imagine. And again, it's action-oriented guys. The way they hooked up wasn't in a mosque. People pray in a mosque. They have to be quiet in a mosque. Then in Friday afternoon sessions, if they start yelling, they're expelled from the mosque. Almost in all of these cases, the imams expel them. These kids, by the way, 5 of the 7 guys who blew themselves up after cornered by the police, all grew up together in this one neighborhood within 200 meters of one another in this small barrio of Tetuan. 59 friends from Darna, Libya, went to Iraq to blow themselves up. The worst wave of suicide attacks in Israel were by a single soccer team. 10 guys from a single soccer team. Could it be that these 10 guys from the soccer team are all crazy psychopaths? Could it be that those 59 kids from Darna, Libya, who went to blow themselves in Iraq are all psychopaths? No. What happens is one guy brings the other guy in, they're in this transitional stage, says, here's a glorious cause, let's go. They bounce off one another, they psych themselves up, they're ready to go. Most of them don't go anywhere, but a few do and get through. And that's pretty much the history of jihad. Okay, this is the school, the elementary school, where all these suicide bombers came from, in the guys in Madrid and their friends who went up to Iraq to blow themselves up. I went to this school. It's Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, and Goofy. You see plastered all over the school. There's no Quran. People aren't particularly religious. In fact, religious education is a negative predictor of who joins the jihad. Almost everyone who joins it has not a religious education. They are born again in their late teens and early 20s. They buy into an extremely superficial media message. Muslims are being persecuted and killed, attacked in the world. Bam, that's it. That's basically as thick as it goes. And then, if that feeling of injustice resonates with personal frustrations, you've got the makings of a would-be jihadi. Now, up till now, that's been rare in the United States compared to other parts of the world, especially Europe, for a very simple reason. The social fabric of the United States is built for immigration. Muslims attain parity by the first generation, and by the second generation usually surpass the average in terms of education and income in the United States. In Spain, they're 19 times more likely to be poor and not to have anything beyond primary education. In Britain, it's 9 times more. In Germany, it's 7 times more, which is why there have been several thousand arrests in Europe for people involved in jihadi activities, only a few hundred arrests in the United States, again, most of them entrapment cases, but every once in a while, someone gets through, like the Boston bombers. In any event, Awlaki is out there in Yemen, and he is sending messages to Americans saying, do jihad, right? And they're sending messages about how to make bombs. For example, pressure cooker bombs, which they stole from the anarchist cookbook. And he's telling people, don't come to Yemen. If you come to Yemen, you're going to get caught, or you're going to get me caught. Stay home. Do what the Washington sniper did. Terrorize people. Blow up something. Go to a sporting event and blow up something with a pressure cooker. And he'll get a taker. He got a taker. And he probably will get more takers. Can we ever stop this? No. Can we live with zero tolerance? No. Because these things do exactly the opposite, I think, of what we want them to do. They inspire terrorists. They amplify terrorism. Terrorism is an extremely marginal phenomena. You're more likely to be killed by a lawnmower or an unregulated fertilizer plant than you are by a terrorist bomb. It's dangerous, it's ghastly, it's brutal, it's horrible, but it can never, ever, given the means today, seriously affect the economic or social infrastructure of the United States. It is only the reaction to it that can. You got to get these guys before they lock in, because once they lock in, basically, for example, the guys in Al-Qaeda, the only thing you can do really is fight them to the death. But before then, there's always a chance of moving them away. And the only way we can do that is get into the networks, get into the communities, talk to the young people, find out what they're thinking, find out who their heroes are, find out what their dreams are. You know, I'm in Tetuan, in the neighborhood that produced those suicide guys who bombed Madrid and sent guys to Iraq. And the kids are playing soccer in the garbage. And I'm interviewing them and asking them who their heroes are. First hero, Ronaldinho. He's a soccer star for the Barca team. The world outside the United States is divided into supporters of the Barca soccer team and the Madrid soccer team. Number 2 hero, the Terminator, has no idea related to the then governor of California. Number 3 hero, Osama bin Laden. You know, a week after the election of Barack Obama with my wife. Same place, different kids, same age group, 8 to 16 years old. I asked who their heroes are. First hero, Eto'o, tied with Sergio Morales. The Cameroonian striker for the Barca team, tied with the Real Madrid soccer star. Second hero, Terminator 2. It had finally gotten to this burial at the Jemama's wife. Third hero, just beating out Osama bin Laden, Barack Obama. Now, what is it telling us about these kids? It doesn't tell us they're evil kids. It tells us they're at junctures in their lives. They're at forks in their lives. They're looking for role models in the world. They're looking for heroes. They're looking at which direction to take, where to find significance, where to find adventure, where to be glorious, where to mean something. And you've got 2 opposing messages here for them. Yes, we can, and you can become like me, a black man, head of the most powerful nation in the history of the world. Or happiness is martyrdom. You can do what those guys did with box cutters They changed the course of the world. They caused the mightiest nation in the history of the world to shake at its knees. So you pick what's more feasible for you. And the only way we can make it more feasible for them is to actually work with them. So I'm at the White House again. I bring these results to the White House. Cheney's staff is there. This young woman from Cheney's office says to me, well, these young people, even those young people in that neighborhood you're talking about, they don't understand that we can't accept this and we're going to bomb them and we're going to kill them. So I sort of flabbergasted. I said, could you repeat that? And she repeated it, and I said, what are you going to bomb? You're going to bomb London? You're going to bomb Morocco? They're our allies, for God's sakes. You got to figure out something else. It's about finding heroes. It's about working in the communities and the networks. It's about empowering them. One last anecdote on this. I'm asked by the USAID to evaluate their program in Morocco. It's a local governance program, right? So tens of millions of dollars invested. Most of it goes to renting stuff from the King's mother, at exorbitant fees to house the USAID contractors there. Very little gets into the country itself. But one of the things that do get done is building Dar el-Shabab, youth houses, in every major town in Morocco. So I'm supposed to count how many youth houses there are. I said, I said to the United States government, aren't you interested in what goes on in these youth houses? No, that's not part of the evaluation metric, in which we're going to decide who next gets this $10 million grant. I said, come on. So I decided to go myself into the youth houses and look what's going on. And there are the kids there. They're surfing jihadi sites, right? Like night and day. And doing other things like inventing a language. They invent a language they call Franglish. It's French, English, Spanish, and Arabic all rolled into one. And so that only they understand what it's doing. And they're talking about girls, they're talking about jobs, they're talking about everything under the sun, including jihad. So finally I say, geez, this is very interesting. They've invented this language in your youth houses. And so what's the response of the US government and the contractors? We've got to end it. We've got to kill it. And I said, what are you kidding? They've created it. This is their mode of expression. You get into this and maybe you can really do something. Using their passion, their expression, their invention, not something invented in Washington. Maybe you could do something. No, they kill it. And that's basically our response to what I think are the real problems of the creation of jihad in the world today. And just my last slide. In May 1776, there was a vote in the Continental Congress for separation from England, and that vote failed. And then the Adams, Sam and John, hooked up with some of the big landowners in Virginia, like Tom Jefferson and George, and they convinced the propertyless artisans of Philadelphia to go their way. Why the propertyless artisans of Philadelphia? First, they were good politicians. Philadelphia was the most important and largest city in the colonies. Philadelphia controlled Pennsylvania, which was the largest, most important colony. Pennsylvania controlled the Mid-Atlantic votes, which were the most important block of votes. So by getting the propertyless artisans of Philadelphia, they could sway the Continental Congress to vote for separation of England. And the way they did it was say, you will get a vote, you will be able to represent yourself without property, just because who you are, and that did it. They wrote the Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal, and they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Talk about absurd ideas. 200,000 years human beings have been on the face of the earth, at least separated from Neanderthals. 200,000 years, right? How is that history defined? Cannibalism, infanticide, wars, homicide rates, an order of magnitude greater than they are today. And then all of a sudden, a bunch of intellectuals decide no more torture, equality, which all of human history says no one is equal. And it's not because providence or nature made it so, it's because these revolutionaries made wars and revolutions to make it so. Now everybody buys into these apparently absurd ideas. They have made them real by acting them out. So the same things that have driven the people who founded our country from a sort of Darwinian point of view also drive the terrorists. Our choice is to try to show the world why their way is a better path for these young kids than those of the Boston bombers. Thank you.
So the question I want to ask before we open it up is how you would incorporate this new set of terrorists who are inspired by relatively informal links and by quick cuts on an internet culture, how you can incorporate them into the first half of your talk, which is really very much more about the nature of religion and almost religion as an organized event that either propels events or is manipulated by larger powers.
Well, thanks for the question. I think that what these guys are doing is very much the way New Age cults and new religions are born. That is, they're trying to figure out what set of values will bind them, organize them, drive them to commit glorious deeds that will live forever. And they find them on the internet. They're floating around in this case, within the jihad. And then they try to figure out who will go along with them. And the ones that usually will go along with them are the friends or the family members that they can draw into them, but this larger virtual community which empowers them. So it's their devotion to these again, transcendental ideals, which are, again, not so much different from what the American revolutionaries did. And from an evolutionary point of view, enables groups of genetic strangers to unite and bond together in the competition with other groups. Now that competition can be for anything at all. In this case, it is for the salvation of the world. So I think that's the way the two go together.
Okay. Sir?
Sure. My name is Ian Hansen at York College, and I know Scott. We worked together a while. So one of the messages that I got coming kind of subterraneanly out of your talk was you get more flies with honey. And it seems like that's not necessarily the way a lot of people who would become involved in terrorism think, though. They imagine that terrorism is an effective tactic for attaining their goals.
Right. Well, certainly I think that terrorism works on the principle of flies and honey. And I do think that it's not as successful as they'd like it to be, because the message they bring is pretty depressing. That is basically a path to the grave. But I do think that it has been much more successful than its means would otherwise allow, because they are making this costly displays of commitment to an apparently absurd idea. And the reaction, the material reaction they're drawing out from the United States and others is such that the others are taking this idea seriously. So a few people, never, I think in human history, have so few people caused so much fear in so many. And in that, they've achieved their goals. Now, how do we stop it? How do we prevent it from spreading? How do we leverage it? How do we turn it? How do we help those people who want to live with different sets of values, live their lives? How do we interact with them without violence? This is something we have to, we try to come to grips with, but we can no longer ignore what these people have brought to contemporary history. So, okay, they haven't gotten the caliphate, but they've got a hell of a lot more than you would have imagined with a couple of pipe bombs, a pressure cooker, and some box cutters.
I would like to thank him for what was an incredibly stimulating talk and a very vigorous question and answer session. So thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you.